tonight's meeting. It's a doubled info session tonight. The first will be hearing from our consultant who's working on our bicycle pedestrian plan. And they'll be doing a presentation about the progress they've made on the plan, and also seeking the questions and guidance from council members as they develop that plan. And that will be followed by a session talking about the future of our water systems, to answer questions the public may have about the current status of our water system, and the recommendations that are before council coming at the regular meeting on the 27th of this month. So, I also just want to remind council members that we need to adopt our budget by the end of this month, and tomorrow night will be a regular town council workshop where we'll be concentrating on any questions or observations you may have about that budget as we near completion of that project. So again, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. And so our first info session tonight is on our bicycle and pedestrian plan. And I'm going to have Vice Mayor McKenna to introduce our presenters.
Yeah, Christy and Rachel are consultants that some of you may have heard from before. They've been working with a pretty large committee for about, a year. And a lot of public sessions, walking the town, and previously they had come up with some ideas of potential areas where we could add infrastructure for bike pedestrian or repurpose, redirect people in existing roads. So very good sessions. I think tonight this is about bringing it to the wrap in terms of concrete ideas and proposals that make sense for us. So I'm going to just turn it over to them.
What? Person. All right, got it. There. It's not the first thing I have to replace. Oh, collection of pens on here. Thanks. James touched it last. He broke it. Angela, I don't have to come out of this, or are you going to do that for me?
We'll see what happens.
So I'm Christy Carter. I've been here in front of you before, so I think you know who I am. Rachel probably might be the last time you see her. I've questioned for a while. One thing before I get started in the actual presentation, the disadvantage of doing these a week ahead of time is you think of things between then and now. So what I don't have on the slide is I thought it'd be helpful to say kind of how this could work. So tonight we're mostly talking about the policy direction, because that's what you all will be responsible for eventually. So when we do the plan, we will have a section in the plan that talks about our policy recommendations. Those are just recommendations, but right now we have lots of different ways that we can go, so I'm trying to get that narrowed down a little bit. And then in the future, if you like the policy recommendations, what you would do working with the planning board, or however, whatever structure you want to do, is if you say to the planning board, we'd like for you to tackle fee in lieu, you would work with town staff, work with the planning board, that would come as a formal policy to you, and then you would adopt it. So by doing this, this is just kind of giving us the policy ideas and directions, and you're not deciding on actual policy tonight. So with that change, then we can start running through. Just to recap a little bit about the plan, the purpose is to identify the connections, build the network, and foster pedestrian and bicycle friendly Weaverville. And that policy piece really does start to come in kind of under the build the network and fostering pedestrian and bicycle friendly Weaverville. Okay. And then what the questions that we're looking at are how do we get around in terms of the infrastructure network on sidewalks, greenways, and bicycle facilities. The policy discussion primarily revolves around sidewalks and to a small extent greenways. It's a little harder to build bicycle facilities through land development policies. It can be done, but since so many of your roads are NCDOT roads, that has to be a partnership. And we'll spend most of our time talking about pedestrian connections. And so this is just an overview of where we are so far with the system plan. We have a network of sidewalks, new sidewalks, some multi-use paths and bike lanes laid out. I'm not going to get into all of those projects, but just kind of give you an overview. We've looked at kind of the city, the town center as the hub and all these kind of avenues connecting to downtown to all points of town. And that's just a view of downtown. A lot of the work, or what we're calling the crosstown connection to get from Lake Louise into downtown to start getting toward Weaver Boulevard. And that, if you could do anything, if you could kind of build that connection, it would make a big difference in the town, just in terms of how people can get around, and the rest builds off of that. And why this plan, the vision, the town's vision, positions the town for funding in the future, particularly in partnership with the DOT and its complete streets policy. It supports the local multimodal goals that you've identified in other plans, and then what we're talking about tonight, a policy guide, both for what the town wants to do and how you can help guide developer participation. Thanks, Jason. So the challenge is that we've seen is that to determine the plan regulations, or like the how, which is the it probably should be where and how. The where is what your zoning ordinance says. It's kind of the where and when. When you do X, Y, and Z, then you build sidewalks, or you help us build our green. The how is your standards and specifications manual. So we're not really telling you specifically how to build those sidewalks. We'll have some comments on your manual, but that's the how. So where that infrastructure goes, both in terms of sidewalks, greenways, bike lanes, the development, and then so kind of that's the challenge. And so we have this draft network, and what we want to talk about is how do we kind of, are we, based on what we're thinking in terms of policy, are we hitting the right area? So as you grow and change, you're getting the sidewalk network that you want in the future. So that's kind of the lens that we're looking at this through. So policy questions, we're looking at new development, and I'll go through each of these as quickly as I can, quickly and clearly as I can. How do you deal with new development? What happens during redevelopment, because that's a blank spot in your ordinance currently. Somewhat connected to redevelopment is what we're calling pedestrian context areas. And an example of that is downtown, and I'll explain that. I want to talk about waivers and using fee in lieu, and then this future land use plan just a little bit. All right, so development first, new development. So currently, so the goal of this part of the conversation, or our thinking really, is how do you expand and improve that multimodal network that we want to build through new development projects, so that whether the developer completely does that, or you have some partnership where a developer does A and B, you do C and D. I know my alphabet. So that's the goal. What do you do for new development? And then we'll go to the next one. And this is from your zoning ordinance. You have two sections, and I can't quite, I'm not going to repeat that number. It's right there because I can't see it very clearly. So this is one section that talks about required improvements. It's under Article 4. And then James, you'll go to the next one. And I'm going to actually have you flip back as well, James. So I just want to, yeah, other way. Yeah, and then you have Article 5, a section that says off-street parking, loading, unloading areas and sidewalk regulations. And James, if you'll flip back to 4 one more time really quick. So in Article 4, under this section, it says, this is where your ordinance says, if you're required to build sidewalks when there's a line on the map in an adopted plan. That's the general sense of it, and I'll go through this in more detail. And James, to the next one. And then this one gets more specific. It doesn't have that line in the map clause in there. And so James, go ahead. So if we look at these two in comparison, when you can supposed to construct sidewalk on 2404, it's when you do a minor subdivision or a major subdivision. if that street is on a plan. You do it on one side, you build it to the standards in your specification manual. If the developer can't do that, then that request goes to the Board of Adjustment. That 3503, you construct sidewalks on all new commercial construction for multifamily residential, all major subdivisions, and certain minor subdivisions. Along street frontage, with the where is along street frontages, on side of these streets, you build up a standard. There's a clause in there that says the Public Works may determine that you have to build a sidewalk if it's dilapidated. No specific standards about that, and then also waivers go to the Board of Adjustment. Okay, so keep that in mind. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So under redevelopment, looking at section 3503, the sidewalk rehabilitation shall be required for new types of development projects. And that's in my addition is all new because that's how I'm interpreting the ordinance there. Where sidewalk has been determined by the Department of Public Works to be dilapidated. I'm not sure if you intend it to be all new. And the question is, if you want to expand and build a better network, generally when towns have a redevelopment standard, it's when it's not just under new construction projects, it's also when you're doing rehab projects. Some towns say all rehab, some places say if your investment is in 30% of the new building, 50% of the new building. Asheville says 75% of the new building, and they're trying to back that down because they're missing out on some opportunities to rehab sidewalks and build them up to new standards. Okay, keep going. And then, so some of the, and we will go back through these because I want to introduce all the concepts and then open it to discussion. So under redevelopment, the thing that we're wondering if you want to consider is, should you have standards and provide the opportunity to improve existing sidewalk? Is there an investment threshold, meaning 75% investment, 50% investment, or a square footage type investment? So go to the next one. An example of that is you would consider, like, if you were doing redevelopment, you would consider standards for certain areas of town, and downtown is what I'm thinking of. You want that to be a pedestrian friendly, you want it to be activated, street dining. Right now, it's kind of hard to have on-street dining. People are really tight in front of Glass Onion or in front of Well-Bred. If some of those buildings rehab, you could have an opportunity to expand that sidewalk. So go to the next one, and I have an example. Nope, sorry, back one. Maybe I used it for pedestrian content. Okay, yes. Let's say, for example, something happened and what's currently the laundromat, somebody got that building and they wanted to redevelop that. Right now, if someone came in, and this is all if I'm interpreting your ordinance correctly, if someone came in and wanted to do a new development at that corner, you don't have really clear standards to say, we want you to have this really pedestrian friendly, activated sidewalk in front of your new building that you're constructing on this pretty significant lot in your downtown. So that's why we're thinking about this, is that you do have some places that could redevelop, that could be a little more pedestrian friendly. Okay, so this one we've changed the name a little bit. We're trying to get a little bit more clarity on it. We're calling it a multimodal overlay. In an overlay district, you're probably familiar with, it's like you meet, like if it's your central business district, you meet those standards. And if we overlay a district on that, you also meet those standards in this specific area. And so the question is, are there areas in town that need more pedestrian and bicycle connections? If you remember, I said earlier that there's a redevelopment and this overlay, they overlap, kind of the same thing, but a different tool to get there. One would be a set of standards, one would be an overlay district. And the goal here would be to expand and improve that multimodal network in important areas of the town. You could also think about Weaver Boulevard for this, because that's not the greatest pedestrian environment, but if you did an overlay district, every development project that came in there would be partnering with you to make that more pedestrian friendly. So go to the next one. And so, this could be a consideration as you annex areas into town. So you're kind of saying every new area that we annex into town is gonna meet our new pedestrian standards. This is probably not the best tool to achieve that. Your zoning ordinance is probably the best tool to achieve, what to do with annexed areas, but this one is an option as well, okay? And then talking about favors and waivers or fee in lieu, the goal here is to develop a fee in lieu program to increase funding for multimodal projects and identify other tools to expand your multimodal network. So this is, instead of that waiver going to the Board of Adjustment, you would have a fee in lieu policy that if a developer met certain standards and could not build that sidewalk, or you as a council, or give that power to the planning board, whatever it might be, you say the town's policy says there are times when we know you can't build sidewalks. However, we're committed to building our multimodal network. Therefore, you're going to pay fee in lieu. You're going to pay us money, you're going to pay into our pot so that we can do something else somewhere. So right now, with going to the Board of Adjustment, you don't have that opportunity to, you don't have that opportunity to get the cash from that. But it's probably not going to be the money truck pulling up, but it is a little bit like if you wanted to do crossing improvements, maybe you get a couple of fee in lieu projects and maybe you're able to have a little bit of money to do something and invest in that pedestrian network. Okay, so just a little bit about that, and I will say that this is something that you want to work closely with your attorney to develop if this is a direction you want it to go. In general, the fee in lieu policies talk about when and where it can be used, what's the approval process, usually a fee schedule, and then there is a process to account for funds. I know when James and I talked about this very early on, I think if you thought of what is it like I don't know anything about subdivision bonds, but I know they're really complicated. This is not nearly that complicated. It's just a separate, kind of your other separate funds that you may have. Kind of who would administer it, record of how funds would be used, and are you going to be able to use it in sidewalk and trails, just the counting of those funds. We've given you, I don't expect you to read that small text, but just that's the reminder for me to tell you that there's a part of this presentation that we're not going to go through. We've given you some examples of what other towns have done so that you can take a look at that in the future. Okay. So next steps for us, and then we'll kind of go back through each of these or just open up a general discussion. But our plan is to have a draft plan to the community by July 7th. So we're kind of pushing to get that, and that's why this conversation is important for us. We'll have a final steering committee on July 21st, and then we'll come back to you at some point for a formal adoption. That usually takes a while because we have to wait for NCDOT review, and that can take some time. So that one is a to be determined date. So that's a good bit of information, a little bit of time for discussion. What I'm looking for in general is some guidance on what we need to put into that plan. Like if you hate the pedestrian overlay district, or you hate the fee and lieu district or idea, then we'll pick those out and we will put them in. So maybe James, if you can, you read my mind. So new development, redevelopment, pedestrian context areas, and that's where I did not change the name there. That's where I started calling it the overlay district. The waivers, and I did take out future land use planning, but I didn't take that bullet off. So in my mind, I think those are kind of, if I had ranked them in order of importance, I would say, again, from my mind only, new development, thinking about those waivers, new development, redevelopment, and thinking about the waivers, and if you don't think the pedestrian context areas are probably okay. So that's a lot. So let's start with questions. If anything is not clear, or just general thoughts and ideas or responses that you have.
We have a particular problem with the downtown because widen the sidewalks would have to take away from the parking. We've got problems with parking with these catch-22. Do one or the other, and can't do both of them.
Yeah, so when we were putting this together, we were looking at specific examples, and that's why we actually came up with two. One being that corner lot, and that's actually more of a redevelopment, where you actually have, that parcel has plenty of room to go back into the parcel, and that's what you want developers to do. So you're not taking away from what the town has. And then the other one is, remind me of the name of the new road that's being constructed right on Main Street right now.
Leveler,
Say that again?
leveler,
Level,
yes.
the leveler, there, did we take that picture out? That one, you've got your sidewalk, you have a little bit of frontage space, and then you have your building. So if you had talked about, if you had building rehab standards in place, you could have had a wider sidewalk in that. There are places where people are not gonna be able to do that. And you're downtown, you're tight, and you know that. Therefore, if you have your feed and loop policy, you're still having those developers participate in your system when they can't physically do what you're asking them to do.
So that program kicks in when you can't physically, it's not, they don't want to, but I can't do it to the extent you want me, I'll throw you a fee, it's physically can't do it. That's the intent.
In general, and I think the reason that it goes to your board of adjustment is it kind of is like a variance. It's I can't meet the standards as you have them written in your ordinance. It's just in this case, you're allowed to say we're gonna have you do fee and layer instead of, like if somebody wanted to put a building in and they had I don't know, it's always so hard for me for board of adjustment examples. They just couldn't do it, then they couldn't meet the letter of the law of your ordinance. The board of adjustment is their press release valve. You can't say to someone in a regular land use board of adjustment case, pay us money into this fee. It's just a tool that local governments have for sidewalks and things like that, yeah.
I think that's a great tool that we should look at, because right now people just go to the board of adjustments because they don't want it. And we say, and then they say, okay.
I think one thought from because you asked general on this policy, is something that I talked to them a few months back, because obviously you can't do everything, you can't do everything at once. But if we want Weaverville to truly be pedestrian as it grows, from border to border, there was kind of three spokes in my mind that we needed to really think hard about. One is, north and south, so being able to go all the way out North Main Street. The other one, real critical, because all our high density stuff that's happening across the highways, being able to go east-west across the highway, so somebody leaving an apartment could walk to town hall. And then the third one that you touched on is from here down to the community center. And if we did nothing more than over the next X years, get those three well done, and then you're kind of setting a culture precedent too, versus picking off little point projects like, oh, it'd be cool to do that with that street or that, but then they don't really tie together. That's just personal thought.
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to ask a question or ask Tracy to give some information. NCDOT obviously is on our committee, our steering committee. Main Street is a state street.
Yeah.
So can you share with the council and your what you anticipate the impact will be, or what, not necessarily the impact, but how NCDOT will address if town council wishes to go forward with certain items, specifically with Main Street and any way impairment.
Yeah,
really. How does NCDOT typically address those issues?
So you're asking that from a project perspective and not a policy perspective?
Yes.
Okay, so from a project perspective, if you remember the one slide that had like 3 or 4, why are we doing this kind of things, there's that funding opportunity. When NCDOT has adopted its most recent version of its complete streets policy, back in the day when it first created it, it was kind of fuzzy on how it could be used. Then it clarified it and said, in order for us to participate in a complete streets policy with you, town of Weaverville, you must have those lines on the map. Now, the hard thing about just having the lines on the map is if you, you can't go out tomorrow and say to DOT, we have a line on the map, build this project for us. So those projects on the DOT roads still have to go through that state transportation improvement planning process. And they still have to be prioritized, you're still competing within the region, it's hard to do, makes things slow. But if DOT were to come through and say, we're gonna do some safety improvements on Boulevard or we are gonna do paving, that's when you look for those opportunities. They should be looking at those lines on your map to see what those are. So the DOT projects are harder, they take longer. And it is staying in touch with your DOT folks, it's participating in NPO, it's advocating for your projects. That's how those are gonna get done. To an extent. Now, there are some things in terms of like safety improvements where there are more options for communities, but it is still staying in contact with DOT, recognizing that it's an implement, those things like that. I will say, just to connect that question back to the policy piece, Main Street is a DOT road, but in those redevelopment projects that we were mentioning, that sidewalk expansion goes onto the developer's property, not into NCDOT's right of way. So you back it in, and that's why, to Mr. Jackson's point, sometimes it wouldn't work.
So Christie, so you referenced the DOT would have to review your proposal, but I assume the DOT is only going to make any kind of judgment on those parts of the proposal to affect their streets, correct?
And generally, the review is they read through the document and it's like editing and textual kind of stuff. Since they've been with us through all of the, they're on our steering committee. We do a special meeting just with NCDOT staff. I don't think that I've had a project pushed, like a specific project. I don't think I've had a plan review where they said, no, don't do that. Just because they're with us as we're developing them. Now that I say that, y'all might be for test case.
And could you, now the complete streets policy, I assume, could you describe that a little more in detail and how that works?
Yeah, I'm gonna look to Rachel. She's actually a little better about talking to this. She's better about the specifics. I'm good at the general. So the complete street policy is as DOT is thinking through their projects in the future, as they develop those projects, they are supposed to look at those projects through a complete streets lens. How do we accommodate bicyclists, pedestrians, transit riders, vehicles, people who use the road. And when they do that, they are supposed to, in their design, make that as complete as possible. Now, some streets complete might mean just a really new, nice sidewalk. Some streets it might be like Merritt Avenue, the Asheville section, if you've been keeping up with that, as complete as that's gonna be through that road diet project, they're gonna add bike lanes, they're gonna reduce the number of lanes, they're gonna add bike lanes, but they're not fixing the sidewalks. So that's as complete as we're gonna get Merritt Avenue. So they look at it and they're supposed to look at it, they're supposed to look at your plans, they're supposed to look at the NPO's plans and design it as close to that as possible. The funding, the big thing that has changed is in the past, it still required that 20% match, and this is where I call Rachel to kick me if I get it wrong. They used to require that 20% match, and now as long as they're doing a project on a road that you have in an adopted plan, they are supposed to consider that and implement that without the cost sharing. If you go above and beyond that, then they will ask you for more money. The caveat that I will say to that is they are still figuring this out. So if you are 5 years down the road and you're like, Christie stood there and said to me, don't do that, because they I think just kind of as a huge organization, I'm not 100% sure how all of this works together. But in general, that's the intent and that's the hope for it. And if they build any new roads, they should be complete streets as well, like their new roads.
So like an example would be expanding 26, when that was, near to and then making a bridge like that compatible, which I talked about, and John's the guy, this contact now. But since that's pushed off 7 years or whatever, then it's kind of a moot point, right? And maybe we do it have to be on our own.
It's already a dotted line.
I mean, that's an example of, yes, that's a very long-term project, it's a very expensive project, and town of Weaverville's probably not gonna come up with the cash to do that. But that's a line on the map, when they get to it, if your plan's still your adopted plan, they should consider that. I'm gonna stop this conversation because I know I'm running tight on time and see if there are any more policy discussions, because projects are way more sexy than policy, but we need to talk policy, so. So James, if you could go back to that one slide real quick, I just kind of want to get a general head nod of saying, yes, it's okay to do this on those items. And then we'll finish up. So just new development, okay to kind of say, go with the recommendations that we have there. Any no's? This is not a vote, this is my general consensus. Redevelopment, some of the things we're thinking about that. We have some general head nods. Mr. Jackson, is your head nodding? Okay. In the pedestrian context areas, you still have some yeses there, okay. The feed and lieu, okay. Is that all of them, James? Okay. All right, so with that, unless there are any other questions, our marching orders are to make these make sense in a document. You'll see it again. Still more time to talk about it, but that helps us know what we need to do and where we need to go. Okay?
Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing the final version.
Okay, thanks. James, should I just leave this here?
Yeah. So folks, we actually advertised the second session at 7 p.m. So I'm putting product to wait till 7 p.m.
It's not enough.
It's not? Oh, in that case.
I'm sure in the conversation, I would, to be fair, I would wait until 7, you can still have some conversation with me like at 7.
I like that answer. So we'll go ahead and proceed then with the second part of our session tonight, which is on the future of our water systems. And then at least I will stick around until 7 in case someone shows up at 7. We're going to repeat ourselves. How's that? So, as you know, as you're probably aware, town council has been debating now for actually probably the last couple of years, what to do about our future water system and water capacity in the future. We have a plant over on the Ivy River, which we're using approximately 60% capacity currently, but that's increasing all the time. And so we need to plan future since any kind of plant expansion requires a multi-year process and very expensive process. So Trent Duncan is our water plant supervisor, and Trent, could you give us kind of a background and current status of our water capacity in our water plant?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. A little history on the water system in general. It started in the early 1900s. We actually had the Powder Cove watershed, which is now a conservation area of about 300 acres. That all fed from Mount Williams Creek, from Ox Creek area back this way. That fed our town until the water plant our current plant come online in 1997. They started planning in the mid 80s, early 90s, doing all the stream studies and everything it took in order to find the right location, find where the town could withdraw water for possibly hundreds of years as the sole water source for the town of Weaverville. So they started actually up the Little Ivy Fork in Buncombe County and found out that wouldn't sustain what the town might need in the future. So they come down below the confluence of the Big Ivy, Little Ivy. And there's 2 bends in the river that come into Buncombe County. So that's where raw water pump house is located. It's in one of those bends of the river below about a quarter mile below the plant itself. Currently, we're a 1.5 million gallon a day plant. It's what we can pull out of the river. We have the pre-existing permit that allows us to pull up to 4 million gallons a day upon approval from the state on plans of the plant. We still have to submit the plans for an expansion. They have to still be approved. But the original permit says we can pull up to 4 million gallons a day because of where we directly located that raw water station. That was all part of our previous council's decision at that time, was to move it to there so that we could have many years of service from the Ohio River. It was built as a mirror image plant. That meaning that our plant, exactly as you see it today, would just have another wing on it. And most of the piping is already stubbed out and ready to go, as far as filters and things inside the plant. That's actually a huge money savings, even though we all seen the numbers and it don't seem like it at this point, but because they've done all that, it saves tons of money. Currently, as the mayor said, we're pulling out averaging about 670,000 gallons a day right now.
Can you hold that? I'm gonna interrupt, because you keep saying 60%. It's not, it's the other way. It's less than 50%.
47% is what we're currently pulling.
You said that a couple of times, and I was like, I think you just got it backwards. So I thought it was less than 50%.
47% is roughly what we're averaging pulling right now for the last 3 months. With our commitments and future development infill in town, we're at about 69.9%. That commitments, and those are things that are already committed and in-town infill that we have to reserve water for, because we have to supply in town.
I mean, if in town was built out. So
If it was built out, yeah.
Who are our commitments today?
Who are they? There's a whole list. It would be part of those commitments, like I said, are infill. There's some meters that aren't in service that are on there. And then you have the apartment complex by the lake. You have the one that we're currently in the middle of going through as council is doing. And then you have the ones that are building out now as
And
well.
those are counted in the 69%.
69.9%. Yes, that's everything that's currently being built and currently has a water allocation.
With 400 gallons a day,
Yes.
which is 1,000% wrong.
Yeah.
That's
So,
the calculation we have to use by the state.
So
And
what?
once they're built, the
It's wrong.
calculation changes. I need
Yeah.
to-
once they're built and we get accurate numbers, that comes off, it goes to actual usage.
Which is fourfold.
So once they're built, 69% is no longer the correct number.
Because
Right.
theoretically, unless you have some people that use a whole lot of water. But
Statistics show.
statistics show about 125 gallons a day is what is actually used most of the time, in most homes.
And apartments is less than 100. We've gone over all of this before. And again, I'm just gonna correct it every time it's wrong. And I'm not gonna argue with you, Captain. I don't care what the NCD or DOT, DOW says. Nobody in town, in a residence, is using 400 gallons a day. Okay? It's just wrong. So we go, well, they told us to use it. Okay?
It's our
It's
job.
wrong.
You know why it's our job to prepare for it though? Is because we've been talking about this for 7 years. And it's not happened yet. And it'll be 7 more before we actually turn a switch somewhere. So you may not care, but we all need to care.
Well, I care. No, wait a minute. I care. You say, I care. I care. What I won't do is use wrong data. So we want to double the facility. We can double this facility today without spending a dollar. Okay, so when the mayor says we're using 60%, that's wrong. Okay, so let's stop using wrong data and use correct numbers. It's not hard.
Yeah, so Trent, the state requires us to plan a certain way, and based on current commitments and totally building out within our borders, we would plan to be at 70%, and we layer back down to 60% or so, or whatever, some number short of that. Right. But then the reality is that we're all expanding.
Yeah, that number has to be used, because like we said, the state says it has to be used, so that you don't get yourself in a bind. You wouldn't want to figure actual numbers and you get some people that just don't care about conservation in, and then be behind the eight ball like a lot of towns are.
Right.
And then the rest of what I have to say is a little bit more about our water system. We have 8 tanks. That's including the tank at the plant. Is storage, it's about 3.95 million gallons of storage in town. We pump from the plant to Hamburg Mountain. And we have 3 main tanks that are 1 million gallons apiece in town. And those basically all gravity flow throughout the distribution system, except for a couple smaller tanks that are pumped to, and then they gravity flow back down, like the top of the golf course and things like that. Currently, just a little bit of data. Last year, at this time, year to date, we brought in about 96 million gallons of water out of the river. And this year, we've only brought in 3 million gallons more. With all the building we've done, we brought in 99 million gallons at this time. Last year, it was around, the whole total year is around 222, 223 million gallons, what we pulled out of the Ivy River. And as has been said in other meetings, we're currently seeking SRF funding for generators and switch over for sodium hypochlorite. And in those, there was 2 of those, and one of them was also the possibility of being able to expand under the funding of that as well. And I think that wraps up what I had to say.
Thank you, sir. Does anyone have any questions for Trent on what he's presented to you so far?
I wonder what the 69% that include that north hill.
We can't hear you,
I can't hear you. No, sir, that does not, because that is not an official, oh, sorry.
So, real quick, my question was, did that 69% include the Mars Hill handshake agreement?
Not at this time, no.
And what he's referring to is we have a long-standing commitment to Mars Hill to reserve 600,000 gallons a day for potential use for Mars Hill. We do have a line that runs from Weaverville to Mars Hill.
If I may clarify that it was not originally a handshake agreement, it was an actual agreement.
If we did include that, though, what would our number go up to? I think it teeters on that scary number.
Yes, it would be, I haven't done the math on it exactly right for this meeting, but it would be pretty close. I should have done the math.
Because it was 200,000 a day, right?
Yeah.
And so could you remind us of what state requirements? For example, once we reach a certain level of capacity, we had to submit a plan to the state on how we're going to manage our future. Can you give us those figures?
That's 70%, you have to be at least thinking about it. 80%, you have to have a plan in place. 90% is, the plan has to, I think, be in for approval with the state. 90% actually have to be starting, deep plan construction.
Good deal. So, say your name and your address and speak, please.
Alex Easy, in dealing with all these numbers and figures here, my question is, and it's been brought up several times, all these figures for the state are based on old data information that's like, correct me if I'm wrong, like 20 years old possibly, high flush toilets, high flush or high capacity water spigots, where everything today has been downgraded to low flush toilets, shower restrictors to cut back the water flow, same way with the faucets, just about all the new construction has all this stuff in place. So my question is how is anybody putting pressure on the state, local municipalities like ours, putting pressure on the state to redo the mandates for these thresholds to be changed, knowing that everything's 20-year-old technologies has been used? That would eliminate a lot of this problem as far as having to build a water treatment plant and expanding it. Yes, I do, we need to expand it, but these thresholds that are kicking in the mandate, why we gotta do something now when construction prices are out the roof because of everything going on? If the state changed their policies, we wouldn't have to be in this pressure situation where we're at right now trying to fulfill these thresholds.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes,
Correct me if
makes
I'm
sense.
wrong?
No, well, you're not wrong, it's a frustration that we've sort of dealt with as well. Just to make sure that I understand, so we have to plan on each residential unit that's planned at 400 gallons per day. But once it actually comes online, then we count the actual usage. So it's you're projecting usage higher than what it will really be. But when it comes online, then you adjust. That's why when Trent was describing it right now, we're at 69%. But when some of these other projects come online, that percent will probably come down because of every reason you just described. They're not really using 400 gallons a day anymore, they're using like
Right.
125.
So it'll come down and then the state recognizes that new figure
Yes.
once it's online?
We recognize it. It goes back into the bucket and then it's available again.
Right. But the state's not gonna make us, our threshold numbers would change as far as the 70, 80, and 90%.
No.
No, I mean, that's what the state is saying, but the amount of what they're saying it mandates has to be used once that's online, and those figures come in lower, we're allowed to use those, and the state recognizes it, and then the threshold of usage would drop.
That's correct.
Okay, just want to make sure I'm all saying.
Tom,
Believe me.
Tom, let me explain, respond to one thing you said. Back many months ago, I was wondering where that 400 gallons a day came from. So I got to check it. The Department of Agriculture, federal, took and did a study that took 3 years to do. It was actually associated with farmers and growers and so forth. And they came up with 400 gallons. And the state just fell into line with what they recommended. And that was based on the federal. It's old data, because they released a report around 1999, 2000. But apparently everybody just hooked up with that because they didn't want to have to fund another multi-million dollar project to determine what the new numbers would be. So they're still using that one that was 20-something years ago.
Right, but, you know, the thing we got here is every time we try to do expansions, and what we need to do, we're at the top of the threshold every time. Am I correct? We're pushing that threshold of having to have this expansion done, when in reality, it really doesn't have to be done right now, but we do need it. I agree, we do need it.
You know how you pay taxes and sometimes you get a refund? And so the government's still gonna charge you those taxes, they still take them out of your check.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get a refund.
I understand.
sometimes you don't. We have been given all this opportunity to talk about this over and over and over again. And then we have had 500 and something people move here just during COVID. We've had 500 apartments come in, more houses come in. And then now they're telling us that because everybody loves this area so much, they're expecting us to have another 10,000 people show up in western North Carolina in the next couple of years. It's reached a point, and we know that the supply chain is bad, the price of materials are bad, and the construction, you can't find people. So like I said, even if we agree all to this next week, it still may be 7 years before we get more water.
I understand that. I'm not saying we shouldn't build. My point is, we still though, are always gonna be under this thing of these numbers of the caps being there on data that was on data from 20 years ago, and it's gonna always affect us. We need to be putting some pressure on the state to change that data using the new stuff we have online with the low flush toilets and the shower restrictors and all that stuff. Get them to change it so that even us, we're not hitting these mandates. Yeah, we're gonna need the water. I agree with you there. I mean, that's not an issue. I agree with wanting to build the plant. I wanna move forward on it. But we, at the same time, even if we build a plant and we don't get the state to change their mandates on restrictions here, we're gonna be right back to where we were today, 20 years from now. That's the point I'm trying to make.
20 or 30 years from now, we'll be right back here.
So,
Thank you, sir. Any other questions? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
one other thing, you may get to it later, but, this is something different, concern. According to the FDA agriculture law, which we got, one of them, anyone that is wanting to get water in our water system, we have to furnish it. So we do not have control of who we can say yes or no to. That was sort of a public works director, so this is a big concern.
So what Councilman Jackson is referring to is, really as part of USDA loan. We built a line that extended over, down to US 2570. And to get that loan, you agree to certain considerations. And so Councilman Jackson is thinking that means that we have to provide water. I'm not sure that's an accurate interpretation. Do you care to, you agree on that? Mr. Jackson?
I don't know that we know that yet, but we certainly believe that there are some restrictions that will apply that will make you, force you to provide water on a first come, first served basis on, at least on that line, one line.
So that one, so if you get USDA loan, it may well be the part of the agreement is you have to provide water. Because you're getting a loan with the whole idea that you're going to expand water service. So that's what Councilman Jackson is referring to. There are several people who signed the talk, and maybe I should just go ahead and go ahead.
Good.
I just have one quick question for Trent. So Trent, during the Citizenship Academy, during your presentation, you had explained that with an expansion of our water treatment system, it would really help you with your maintenance because it would be a mirror image. Can you expand on that a little bit? How would that piece, just the maintenance piece could help with the stage?
It would actually help us in several ways with maintenance and redundancy. But once it's built, we'll be able to refurbish anything that we have on the other side. Since it's mirror image, it can run as a standalone plant. We'll be able to refurbish our old basins, which are starting to get, some spalling as concrete does. You gotta think everything at that plant is pretty much 25 years old. So it'll really help with being able to take something down for, I was speaking with some coating contractors a few weeks ago, and they said it would take almost 4 weeks to pull our basins down, get them prepped and get them coated the way to. They've got a lot of new coatings that are approved for water now, that they didn't have 10, 15 years ago. So you can get really good coatings now that will last for 50, 75 years versus, 20, 25-year concrete. So it gives a lot of opportunities for things like that. And in the plant expansion, it was looking at changing the way our current backwash setup is. Right now, we don't have one backwash pump. So if it goes down, we have to have an emergency crane come in, pick up the pump, have another one put in. And that would give us, if you 2 pumps in place, you just flip a switch. Once we were built out.
Do you have questions, sir? Please say your name and address.
Sure. I'm Alan Steinberg. I live at 48 Brown Street, and I'm relatively new to the town. I've been here 6 years now at this point. And it's sort of a funny position to be in to say, I got here and now we should close the door. And that's not what I'm saying, but I'm raising the issue of how much growth do we really want? And do we have any control over that? And I don't know those answers to that. But it seems to me that we're in this position of saying, if we build it, they will come. And what happens if we get to the point and say, we didn't build it, we don't have any growth? Can we do that? Or what happens at that point? Let's say we don't build the plant and we get to whatever that number is, 90%, 60%, 70%. Can we say to the developer, we don't have any more?
That is certainly an option. But just so you know that the estimates are that we're going to see 20,000 new housing units in Bunker County in the next decade. Most of those will occur in the north half of the county, which is around here. So yes, we can say no. That doesn't. We're not the only source. That doesn't stop development because we say no. There are still wells available. There are still other municipalities that may have water available to them. So we don't have that degree of control, I think, that you're alluding to. That if we say no, the development won't happen.
Yeah, and I'm not saying development shouldn't happen, I'm simply asking the question of how much development do you want? It's sort of beyond just the water issue, which is, do we want to have 4 times the population in 20 years? And what would that mean for us? And I'm saying that building another water treatment plant encourages more development, the way I'm looking at it.
I understand, I'm not sure I agree. I think the development's coming whether we build a plant or not.
Well, it's not coming unless they can get water.
But
They'll
there
get
is,
it from
I
someone
want to say, there's other water sources available.
Okay. And the other
But I
thing,
understand your point.
the other thing that I raised with you, Patrick, is the pricing structure of water and sort of how much of our water is for commercial purposes and how much is for residential. Do you know that?
Can you address that?
Can't answer an exact number, but our commercial's rather low compared to our residential. It's a very
And,
small
and
amount.
is the projection that that will change? Will we get lots, as the population grows, it would seem to me we would get more commercial development? No, yes?
I think that's a good assumption.
Yeah, and do we charge significantly more for commercial than we do for residential?
It's based off of meter size and amount used.
And so can you give me sort of a rough,
I'll have a fee schedule in front of me.
ballpark?
I think a 2-inch meter is roughly maybe 3 times the minimum bill of a 3/4 inch, roughly on our fee schedule. That's the minimum.
I would recommend that our staff not answer these questions unless they do have the information in front of them. I don't want to put that information.
And that was more, we just used to make. And the other thing is that we're going to spend a lot of money on this plant to increase our capacity, essentially double our capacity. Is it possible to consider spending money on water conservation kinds of things? River Keepers just gave out rain barrels at $25 a piece. A lot of water for homeowners like us is used for things like watering gardens and lawns, not for supplying low flush toilets to folks who don't have low flush toilets. And I don't know what the percentages are, but it was alluding to is all this old stuff around. Can money be put towards that?
Absolutely, those are good ideas, I think.
Okay, that's all.
Hello, I'm Barbara Heller. I also live at 48 Brown Street, and I have some other types of questions. I'm just learning about all this too. Something I read in the Tribune earlier this year said that 1/3 of the water customers are not residents. So who are they? And how do we structure that in terms of development and who gets water? If that's a correct statistic.
That is the correct statistics, and Trent, I'll let you answer that one too.
They're just the residents just outside of town, North Buncombe area. It's-
But why is Weaverville responsible for their water? I mean, it may be obvious, but it's not obvious to me.
So it's not that we're responsible for the water, but what we do is when we sell water to non-residents, we charge them twice the rate we charge for Weaver residents. And so it's essentially, they're subsidizing your water costs by us selling to non-residents. It also provides us with the opportunity, when developments want to happen, if they want Weaver water, then we can influence how and where developments happen, and what kind of developments happen, because we have a resource that they need.
But I guess then the follow-up question would be, if we are doubling the plant, is it for Weaverville residents or is it for non-residents?
It would be anticipated that both, that the town population is going to grow as well as the county population around us is likely to grow.
And would the percentage change how the council responds to what we have to do? Like if there's a higher percentage of non-residents, versus Weaverville residents? Would it change the vote or concerns about doubling the size of your water treatment plant?
Well, the water treatment plant serves a regional base of users, so we went past just town limits years ago, and it's funded by all the users, so.
I'm sorry, I keep thinking as you're talking, which is, but the non-residents don't pay Weaverville taxes, so that the double cost for the water doesn't equal what it would be for residents who are paying taxes. No?
Actually, it's double water, actually. Very often,
Yes.
very often double water pays.
It's just, I would like a summary of this, and I'm trying to figure it out.
And very often, also what we do is that we encourage new developments if they want water to annex into towns, if they do become taxpayers.
Okay. And the last question I have for now is, we're talking about water as if, it's limitless. And if we are only using one source, I don't know if the council has had an expert talk about the river and the implications for the river that we take our water from. And if you already have that information, how can we as residents get some of that information? Is that would seem in the long run to have lots of possible consequences?
I'm sure we'll do that answers with more specificity, but currently we are permitted by the state to withdraw twice as much, actually more than twice as much than we're currently withdrawing.
That's only part of an answer. Are there any other environmental concerns about taking that amount of water, even if we're allowed to?
Based on the standards that the state currently has, we would be well within the limits to do so. Can you answer that in more detail?
I think there's been aquatic studies done by the group, whether right now, as far as meeting the state requirements to prove that we can withdraw that water. There has to be a species, or I think it's called vulnerable species assessment, the environmental assessments that are required in order to go through the process. You can't just sidestep those that are required through the whole process.
I just don't know if there's a comparable in this region that we can look at, but thank you.
There are valid concerns that have been brought up by groups that are here tonight that we're considering, because we gotta be stewards of the resource, regardless of what the state said, whatever. The other thing, and I know Patrick's gonna get into it, but all this conversation assumes that the only source is the Ivy River. He and Selena have been looking at some other avenues that are very promising. So I know you want to cover that pretty quick too.
And in fact, maybe this is the time to do that. Why don't I talk about where we're at, and then come back to other questions people have. So Trent has given you a history and current stats of where we're at. The council, a few months ago, directed myself and the town manager to meet with other regional stakeholders and other regional governments to look at what kind of opportunities there might be for collaborative or cooperative ways to increase water capacity, and also see what the status of other towns in our area are dealing with. Because water capacity is not an issue that's only specific to Weaverville. We're all dealing with this issue in some capacity. So during that time, we've had the opportunity to meet with all the regional governments as well as individuals and organizations about this. And when we put these recommendations together, we tried to accommodate items that dealt with conservation, items that dealt with diversification, and items that dealt with expansion. So we tried to look at this in a holistic kind of way. And these are those recommendations. And one, develop a more aggressive tiered pricing system for water. And right now, we do have a tiered pricing system. You get the first, correct me if I get these numbers wrong, Trent. You get the first 3,000 gallons, which is about what the average household uses in 1 month's time. 2,000. 2,000 gallons at a certain price. And then after that, and after you exceed that 2,000, gallons per month, it goes up 9 cents. So it goes up, it goes up relatively a very small amount. You probably would, you would never know that you're paying more for that extra water. A common way to achieve conservation and encourage people to reduce usage of water by many communities throughout the country is to have a tiered pricing system that's more aggressive. So if you're going to use a lot of water, you got to pay more for it. I've given an example here, and you probably have seen that. It's just an example of what it could be. We'll go to staff to come up with a specific plan. One issue we found out is that one town in particular area, the town of Marshall, has a real water problem as well. They are all on wells, and some of their waters are contaminated. They currently have gotten the state funding that would allow them to build a water line from Marshall to Mars Hill. We have a water line that goes from Weaverville to Mars Hill. So Marshall, because they're in a county that is what's called a tier 2 county, they're more likely to be eligible for state funding for these kinds of projects than we are in Montgomery, which is a tier 3 county, which basically is a relative county. They also are a town that has a water not an emergency, but a water problem, and it also tends to have financial risk. So one thing we do is look at going into, in conjunction with Marshall, and apply for state funds, of which right now there's a large amount of because of American Rescue Plan money right now. So we could apply for funding that would allow us to expand our plant to provide water, not only to Weaverville, but to the town of Marshall, which has a much greater water problem. That could potentially get us a sideload money that would pay for the rather expensive expansion of our plant. Right now, the first round of that funding is being debated right now, but they're anticipating a second round in September. Marshall indicates to us that they will have their engineering work done by July, and we could possibly put together a proposal in that second round of funding to try and see if we can find a way to pay for this rather expensive project. And just keep in mind that the expansion of the water plant that we've discussed in the past is estimated to be about $14 million. So it's a hefty amount. So that's the recommendation to do is work with Marshall.
One clarification, so the line from Marshall to Marshall is mainly to get Marshall's water source 2 feet Marshall.
So Marshall wants to be cooperative and help out Marshall, but the reality is Mars Hill, although they're only at 38% of their capacity, their total capacity is fairly limited. So if they were to do this, or supply Marshall, then they would find themselves in the same situation we're in, where I think that's where they would be at over 60%, something like that. But the town of Marshall only uses, if I'm correct, if I remember, you know, help me with this, it is 100,000 gallons a day. So in terms of total usage, it's not a huge population in Marshall at this point. That's just that recommendation is just a way to try and tap into possible funding for paying for any water expansion we might do here in Weaverville. And help our neighbors. Marshall, who is in the jam. The third is to retrofit our water line connection to Mars Hill. We have a water line that runs to Mars Hill, but the valve only lets the water flow one way. But I've been working with Trent and our public works director, and it turns out this is actually an easy fix. Since we're downhill from Mars Hill, water will flow back down. So in terms of emergencies, both of us, either ones can have a water emergency and need to be able to get water from another source besides our own single source. So that would Mars Hill and we're able to have a backup system either for supplemental water we might need or for emergency water. And that turns out to be a fairly easy fix. We've also met with the Woodford water system, and the next recommendation would be to connect our system to Woodford water. Woodford's water lines actually run parallel in some places, actually cross our water lines in some places, but we didn't think we actually connected it anyway. So one way to diversify our water source and thereby allow us to have another water source available to us in times of emergencies or to supplement our water needs would be to connect to the Woodford water system. Actually, we have found out in this work that there actually is a connection. We just had forgotten about it over the years. And actually to reinstate that connection is also a fairly easy technological fix. So that's another recommendation, is to connect to Woodford water. Next is to negotiate extra water supply from Asheville. We currently have a water line that connects us to Asheville, which I don't think has ever been used, or maybe used once. Is that correct?
Just a couple times since the plant was built.
Asheville has a very huge capacity of water, which could be a way to us to either buy, we could purchase supplemental water from them, or also by making sure that that connection is ready to use. Would also be available to us in emergencies. So if we connect to Mars Hill, to Asheville, and to Woodfin, it diversifies our water source, so we have a lot more water available to us either in times of emergency or to supplement our water needs if we should reach those figures that Trent was referring to earlier. All of these things would hopefully encourage a reduction in the use of water, would allow us to have extra water available to us from other sources in times of emergencies, or to supplement why we built a plant. Because if building a plant is going to take probably 5 years or even longer. And also might need ways to lessen the need for a quick build of an expansion plant. But the last recommendation is that we need to expand our own water treatment plant for the eventuality, since we know that population growth are going to continue to come to Weaverville, and we need to plan for the future, because this is not something you plan for next year, but rather this is you look into the future as in 5 years plus. So those are the recommendations. So
Patrick, I have a question on the Asheville connection, Asheville supply. Because that's basically limitless, and really commend you for having that last discussion. Could that supply, if we were wrong on our assumptions about the viability of the Ivy River for expanding, could that connection to Asheville take over and become the expansion source, or kick it down the road a year or two? In other words, we need another 100,000 because we've expanded. Can that come from the actual source? Cost notwithstanding.
yes, it could. Asheville advises they could. I asked them if they could give us 1 million gallons a day, and they could. So I don't think there's much of a concern with the quantity of water. The price of the water would be about double if we purchased it from Asheville, a double of what it costs us to produce ourselves, which still is not terrible, but that is an extra cost. Another consideration is the quality of water is sometimes could be an issue. For example, Asheville puts fluoride in their water. We do not. That's a real concern for some people. But anyway, the short answer to the question is yes. There is, I wouldn't say a limitless supply from Asheville, but a considerable supply available from Asheville.
Yeah, so like originally this project was going to be 7 million, and we were all prepared to move forward, and then it was 13, 14. If we thought that would moderate or come down some amount in the future, we could buy an extra year to introduce Asheville water.
I think that would be a realistic possibility.
I think I need to ask a question though. Seems like I remember that water line to Asheville is older than me. When was that? 1963?
That's a very old line. There's also some concerns with that wall.
And it's only, is it 3 or 4 inches?
I think there's an 8-inch line up there.
Oh, okay.
I haven't laid eyes on it myself. I think it's when we talked to David, didn't he say he thought it was an 8 or a 6?
8.
And he did make saying that we would have to update our vault just like Woodland's having to update theirs right now in a new meter. And in some further talks, we think that meter may only feed the DuBose Hill tank that's right there beside it, the way it was originally put in, because that tank was originally owned by Buncombe County and was either gifted to Weaverville, or when Buncombe County decided they didn't want to be in the water business, we obtained that tank. I'm not sure exactly on the history of that.
Is that tank currently being used at all?
Yes, it is, but where the problem lies, we can fill that tank with that valve. I think there's no issue doing that based off of pressures. Where we run into more of a problem is, it appears that Asheville has roughly 170 pounds of pressure on their side. And we've done some checking on our side, and when we're pumping from The plant, we have roughly 170 pounds of pressure on our side. So you're not gonna be able to move ashful water into our system with almost the same pressure. When we're not pumping, there's about 105 pounds of pressure, 100 pounds of pressure. Due to line restriction and the age of the lines and friction loss, you're not gonna get very far for 70 pounds of pressure. And elevation.
So we couldn't get 1,000,000 gallons, but
It might be available, we might know.
There would have to be, I think, I'm not an engineer, but I think there'd have to be some kind of pumping involved in order to get that kind of water throughout our system to our main tanks.
I believe a report, with
Yes.
put together as that scenario
Yes.
for that connection. That's not cheap, but it'd be a long-term source.
Roughly $10 million.
Yes.
Probably as well.
Yeah, I do want to.
Currently, just some background, currently Woodford is doing this, they're purchasing 250,000 gallons a day from Asheville. They have the same size line we do, but as Trent referenced, they're looking at having to replace their valves, which we would have to do as well, and that's about 50 grand. I believe. So, all of that, lots of numbers and ideas. What questions or ideas do people have about some of the recommendations, which hopefully the council will be considering at their next council meeting? And oh, I have the sheet already signed up, so let me just refer
I
to
have
that.
questions about the geofencing system. How many households are really affected? How many households are really using too much water? Do we have a number on that?
No.
We don't have a number. One thing I will tell you that you're gonna hear tomorrow night, when we have the budget workshop, is we are gonna present to you another, is that from tomorrow night's?
I think so, the 3% increase on water that we do every year.
There's actually another element to that. I'm not sure which page it's on. I don't have that in front of me. But I am gonna recommend to you that, I would have to look at it to be exact, but, I am gonna recommend to you another tier for those folks who are using below 2,000, in other words, around 1,000. That should be in that document.
This starts at 3,000. I know you said 2,000 before, but this says the first 3,000. And that was the number that
Our minimum bill currently is 2,000.
2,000.
our bill is 2,000. So this new tier, the minimum bill is going to be 3,000.
I would need to look at.
Okay.
I just have to remind us too, but I believe that our pricing structure is based on the first 3,000 gallons. Per se is correct.
But our minimum bill.
So our pricing structure starts at 3,000. It's based on.
First 3,000.
Right, but our pricing system is based on the first 3,000 gallons. Things that never different to a different fee.
Minimum bill for a standard meter is $18.44 for the first 2,000 gallons. Then the next 1,000 gallons is the same $9.22 per thousand that you pay for the first 2,000 gallons. After that 3,000 gallons up to about 22,000 gallons is $10.17 roughly. This is going off of me trying to memorize things. But it's somewhere around in there. So it's, right now our minimum is 2,000. She's saying she's gonna propose a better rate for people to use less water, to promote less water.
That's water conservation.
Yes.
If you can get people to use less water at a better rate, rather than charging people who use the 3,000. A higher rate, because this rate's already higher. I mean, after tomorrow.
But it's only a few cents higher. No one didn't even notice the increase.
You will hear that proposal tomorrow night, and we'll go over revenues in the final budget discussions.
I like, that's water conservation, I like that one. Where you give a bonus to people who are lesser rate to people who are using less. Because whatever you charge me for water, I can't use any less.
Well, actually, having an economic incentive to use us as a powerful tool that's common on using conservation. So, are there any questions more from council, please? So, John Bowman?
I'm John Bowen, living at 50 North College Street, and for the record, I am married to Councilperson Michelle Wood, happily married, I might add. I'm glad to see the council starting to look at water as a regional aspect. Regionalization, I think, is an important thing. Even just talking about the redundancy of having Barstow water, Woodfin water, Asheville water, that adds to resiliency. And in times of challenge, in times of change, times of climate change, that resiliency is pretty important. I want to weigh in though on the matter of the tiered water structure. I think like many people, well, first, you guys know where I live. You know, I have a lot of landscaping. So I see a big differential summer to winter. Landscaping takes water in the summertime. We've done what we can to cut it down. I mulch heavily to cut down the evaporation. I use drip irrigation where I can. But the only way I'm going to save water in that garden area is if I stop growing things. And I know we're well over the 3,000 gallon per month limit in the summertime. So in a way, we're already getting penalized twice. We're getting first penalized by paying a higher rate for that water above the 3,000 gallons. Then we're being secondarily penalized because we're paying an MSD fee, a sewer fee, on that water that's going for landscaping that is not going down the sewer system. So it actually turns out to be quite a difference in water bill from our winter rate to our summer rate. But the point of all this is, as Michelle mentioned there, that even with that higher rate, I'm not likely to stop watering my garden. I'm still going to do that. I'm just going to end up paying the higher rate. So I don't see this as a conservation method. I don't see this as a way of making me use less water. What I see it is a way of charging me more for the water I'm using, and it becomes a tax matter of taking money from me and adding it to a water system that already to me seems to be quite solid. But I'd ask you to think about it this way. What if it worked? What if I could take that summertime usage and cut that down by 1,000 gallons a month? That's a lot of water I'm not using. Is that water conservation? I suggest to you, it is not. What would you guys do with that 1,000 gallons of water that I'm not using? Would it stay in the Ivy River to help the hellbenders? I'm shaking my head. No. What's going to happen to that 1,000 gallons that I'm not using is that it's going to be going across the highway to another apartment complex. You're going to use it all. It's just a question of whether I get to have my garden or we get another apartment over here. Growth is coming, it's inevitable. But at some point, water is going to become, as this gentleman suggested, water is going to become the brakes on the system. And what you're asking me to do is stop doing what I do, stop doing the landscaping, stop doing the garden, so there can be more apartments across the highway. And you're charging me a tax in order to make that happen. It's a social policy issue, it's not a conservation issue. Water use doesn't go down, it simply is reallocated to another part of the system for somebody else to use for something else. Water conservation means less total usage. Taking it from me and giving it to somebody else doesn't mean less total usage, it just means reallocating that water for another purpose. So I urge you to leave that structure alone. Don't try to accomplish that by raising the fee on this tiered structure and make it more expensive for those of us that do use more water. Not, I hope, in a wasteful way, but we do use more water. Don't just reallocate that water somewhere else.
I think the idea of a tiered pricing is not, I think one of the assumption that reallocating water is incorrect. And I think the idea of an economic incentive is a very powerful tool, both on residents and on commercial users, to encourage them to use less water. And by using less water, then the need for water plant expansion might be delayed. And the amount of water we're pumping out of the river would be reduced. So I appreciate your perspective, but I think that using less water is that providing an economic incentive to businesses and individuals to use less water is a very common way to approach water conservation.
I think there are many of us that think that what will happen is that growth will continue and that you will keep growing as long as you have water to allocate to them. And you're taking it from me and giving it to them. I think we'll have to differ on that.
Okay, we do.
Yeah, we do.
Jeremy Diner?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Jeremy Diner. I grew up on Hamburg Drive. I own a house on Church Street, and I've been a water professional for the last 10 plus years. I've worked with dozens of water utilities and local governments like yourselves to help plan, design, fund, and build the next generation of America's water infrastructure. It's been an honor to have the opportunity to bring my knowledge and experience to bear on such a critical decision as y'all face right now. And I have to say, I've never seen such an informed and nuanced and reasonable debate around the subject in any of these situations. So I applaud you for that, whether or not we agree on it. You may be aware I've been working with Save Weaverville. My comments today are my own. And in response, I would like to directly reply to the 6 points that the mayor just laid out. Starting with the tiered water pricing system. I applaud the effort to adjust the water rates to encourage greater conservation. There's a lot of evidence that says that rates are the foundation of a water conservation structure for water utility. Everything else is supplemental to the rates. Currently, customers that use 3,000 gallons per month right now are paying well below average in Western North Carolina due to lack of adequate fixed service fee. Whereas your users at 10,000 gallons a month are paying in the top few percent of all Western North Carolina. So this isn't so much about the river, but this is about equity, and it's a really important part of the value structure of rates. Right now, Weaverville is already an overpriced outlier, and this would be drastically increased by the proposed rate revision in the mayor's comments. So to avoid this, what would be easy is if you implement a flat fee for all water users that corresponds to your fixed water infrastructure costs. So the first gallon might be $20, $30, $40. And so the fixed fee there corresponds with your fixed costs. And then your variable fees, your tiered pricing is going to correspond to your variable costs, which would be the cost it takes to treat, pump the water. So this will calibrate your pricing to your real costs, and it will allow you to adjust your costs with the way water is used a lot easier. So this way you can maintain that 50% step up in tiers, which is really important and does create the signal for people to conserve without becoming this outlier, even worse than we already are. And $18 per 1,000 gallons is not done. So I would just be careful about how you're talking about the rates because you're trying to do a really good thing, and I would hate for a bad thing to come from this good thing. Second, applying for state funds in conjunction with Marshall, I 100% applaud this effort. I recently spoke with Victor D'Amato of the Viable Utilities Unit in DEQ, and I'd be happy to help with any coordination to facilitate this process. Your consultant should be familiar with the application process. I would just stress that the deadline is approaching fast, and I hope that y'all can pull it together in the next few months. Vic said that Weaverville would be eligible for money even if you apply without Marshall. But also your odds would definitely be increased with the way you're talking about it, so that's excellent. 3 and 4, making two-way connections with Marshall and Woodfin. Again, 2 big thumbs up. It's awesome. Like, it's really great that y'all are listening and hearing what the population has to say and incorporating it into your thinking. 5, negotiating extra water from Asheville. Again, this is excellent. Councilman McKenna was saying that Asheville has relatively unlimited supply of water, and that's absolutely true from everything we've seen. And so I would just implore you to consider that this could be a water supply source and not just an emergency water supply. Finally, your 6th comment about expanding the water treatment plant. This is where the rubber meets the road. And I really want to thank you for your due diligence in considering a broader suite of options before about falling back on the status quo expansion plan that we've discussed. I agree that working with Marshall and Marshall is the best path forward, but I cannot accept that if the project is rejected by DEQ, then the best next step is to fall back on the status quo. As I understand it, this is a $50,000 planning grant that we're talking about for DEQ, money that could be found elsewhere. And whether or not the town of Weaverville receives such a small grant shouldn't make or break the decision to debt finance a multi-million-dollar infrastructure project. And with that, I would call to attention the timeline that you proposed in there. And just having done this for so long, I know how long these conversations with Asheville and Woodfin are going to take, and Marshall and Marcel. And there's absolutely no way that you can follow these first 5 points to their logical conclusion by the end of 2022. And you proposed making a decision on the water treatment plant by the end of 2022. And I would just ask that you really do your due diligence on these first 5 and see where they go. And if it's 2023 or 2024 before you make that final decision on the water treatment plant, that might be a little more logical. So all the first 5 recommendations are excellent, and if they're infeasible, I could imagine myself supporting the status quo expansion of the water treatment plant. However, these recommendations need to be fully fleshed out. Please let's focus on the solutions that are fiscally, socially, and environmentally responsible before jumping headfirst into an unnecessary and expensive infrastructure expansion project. Thank you for your careful consideration of this most important issue and your service to the town of Weaverville.
Thank you for your comments. And yes, my timeline probably is ambitious. But it just also want to point out that there are other grants currently available for infrastructure projects such as this from the American Rescue Plan money, which the state currently has, which is probably won't last past this year. And we could actually apply up to $15 million now. If we get that, I don't know, but there is an opportunity that's beyond the grant figures as well.
Well, that's awesome. I have a lot of experience with these kind of grant writing. If I can volunteer, I would give you my time.
You may take you up on that.
You know what I mean.
Thank you. Roger Cordell?
Please, as council, I'll defer my time to Jennifer Mashburn.
Okay. I'm just going to go down the list of votes. Alton Bradley? Okay. Thomas Feasy, did you want us to begin or have you spoken?
I think with the discussion we've had and everything, with all the points that we're doing, I do feel that we need to move forward on the water treatment plant expansion due to several reasons that have already been stated. The basins that we have now are needing to be repaired by expanding the plant. I mean, it's going to give us a good feel for the future, but we, like you said, we need to continue to expand on other water sources down the road, but doing the expansion will eliminate a lot of the repairs when it comes time to put things down in the old plant, that it can be done and fixed in a timely manner, and we won't be striving for water when we've got an expansion that is brand new and can handle the capacity while we do repairs on one and do repairs on the other. It gives us that flexibility to be able to maintain our system that we have and the water that we got, and it'll take care of the future problems for quite a few years. And I think it's a good plan to do. I suggest we move forward on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Heather, I'm afraid I'm not understanding your last name with. Okay.
I'm Heather Whitney-Eden. I live at 11 Bonnie Drive. I am part of the Weaverville Citizens Academy, so this is my first meeting. I know nothing about water treatment plants or usage. I'm originally from New York, been here 9 years. My husband is a native of Weaverville. I do know one thing, that water here is more expensive than New York. That's the one thing that is cheaper in New York is water. But my question is, do Weaverville residents who have wells in Weaverville have any effect on the water supply usage here or the treatment plant?
I have to go to trim on that one.
Sorry.
I mean, not 100% sure how to respond. If you have a whole lot of people on wells pulling out of the same aquifers as the river, then it can have an effect, you know, of the tributaries that feed the river. If you're pulling a lot of the groundwater out, then of course the spring heads that feed the tributaries aren't going to feed as much water to the river. But as far as right here in town, that doesn't really affect where we get our water from 8 miles away.
I was just wondering, if we have a well, but you know, it's just 2 of us, we don't use the water or anything like that, but I just didn't know how that affected the rest of Weaverville with water usage. So.
It's just pulling from the aquifers and the earth and pulling from the water system globally. That's all it is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer Young?
Hi, my name is Jennifer Young. I live at 54 South Main Street, just down the road here. I have a master's degree in nursing, a bachelor's degree in business and accounting, and I've been a registered nurse for about 30 years. My mom was on town council here, and she spearheaded the Ivy River project, and with its inception, when she helped write the grant to get the Ivy River project going. She, along with former Mayor Dolly Sherrill, was a big part of that project. As a nurse, I understand the importance of clean drinking water. While we all like to believe that all drinking water is safe, 10 million Americans consumed drinking water last year that contained pollutants that are linked to cancer and reproductive harm. In 2015, 27 million Americans consumed water that violated the purity outlined in the Safe Drinking Water Act. Approximately 7 million waterborne illnesses occur each year here in the United States due to drinking water contaminated with viruses and microbes which can cause hepatitis, organ damage, and other ailments. I know that aging infrastructure that some systems have today leach heavy metals into the drinking water, such as lead and copper. Exposure to contaminated water leads to a myriad of health concerns, including neurological effects, cancer, learning disabilities, asthma, birth defects, kidney and liver failure, as well as other diseases. With climate changes, worsening droughts, floods, and pathogen overgrowth, all water systems are at risk for pollution due to the damage in the infrastructure. Therefore, we must protect our water supply and ensure that we have an adequate system in place to serve the needs of our community. As a nurse, I've been learning the important lesson that addressing problems upstream can prevent a downstream disaster. Not only is this true in the setting of a pandemic, but it's also true in safeguarding the clean water of which all of our lives depend. As outlined in steps of emergency management, we must take steps to prevent an incident from occurring. We must mitigate the damaging effects of unavoidable emergencies, and we must be prepared to respond if an incident does occur. We must have a response plan in place to recover from any incident. Surveillance that was done by McGill and Associates have identified needs to upgrade our water treatment system. We are now in the mitigation phase to see that we make the necessary corrections to prevent a disruption in service or also to prevent a disaster due to the failures made for the much needed upgrades. Now, most of you in this council are not native to this area. I know that Mr. Jackson has probably been here the longest, but I grew up here. And I remember a crisis that the DeVita Dialysis Center had a few years ago when Wade had water redistributed from the city of Asheville. That quality of the water was so poor because of the aged infrastructure that the center had to shut down its operations and left many patients in the lurch as they could not receive their life-dependent dialysis treatments. I also remember the days in which the town of Weaverville had to ration water. We had a resident, Mr. Wilson, who had a car wash just down past the funeral home over here, and he had to shut his car wash down because of the rationing of the water system. I also remember not being able to wash cars, water our lawns, water our gardens, fill our swimming pools, or consume more than our allotment, or else be fined with an overusage charge. I remember when the Weaverville swimming pool had to close for a season because of the water shortage. I remember the unsuccessful attempts of digging wells and searching for other water resources to provide the needs of the water supply for the town. I recall the countless hours that my mother, along with former Mayor Dottie Sherrill, spent on the development of the Ivy River project. The research, the grant writing, and the tremendous efforts spent by my mother and the other council members to access this wonderful resource of water proved to be a tremendous success in her tenure on this council. The water source allowed Weaverville to grow and thrive with the development of the business district along Weaver Boulevard. We are blessed to have such a clean water system that we have through the intake from the Ivy River. This need to upgrade and expand our water system is not a new request. In the 2017 McGill and Associates submitted an engineering report to the council that outlined the water situation. Since then, our population continues to grow. In the 2020 census report, we have had a 48% increase in growth over the past 10 years. This growth does not include the newest apartment complexes on Monticello Road. The demand for water continues to increase with growth of the town's population and the businesses. And while I understand the environmental concerns of the Save the Ivy River group, research has shown minimal to no environmental impact from extracting the 4 million gallons of water from the Ivy River per day, of which we already have the permit. And we are currently extracting approximately a third of that amount. There has been mention of purchasing water from the city of Asheville. There has been a third-party independent testing of that water, and they discovered many pollutants in the water which exceed the health guidelines for drinking water. These include bromodichloromethane, which causes cancer, kidney and liver damage; chloroform, which causes cancer, central nervous effects, kidney and liver effects; chromium, which causes cancer; dichloroacetic acid, causing problems during pregnancy and fetal development, liver and kidney damage, reproductive difficulties, eye and nerve problems, and again, cancer; hormones that reduce fertility and increase the risk of developmental malformations in the fetus, and disturb the immune and the nervous system; total trihalomethane that also causes cancer; and fluoride, which elevates lead exposure, especially in homes with the old water pipes. The fluoride also causes neurological issues, arthritis, reduced thyroid function, and osteosarcoma, which is bone cancer. In the event that we have to buy water from the city of Asheville, we must have the adequate infrastructure in place to prevent the disaster that was experienced by the DeVita Dialysis Center. While most of us prefer that the town stay like it is, or even like it was, or at whatever cost limit the growth of the town, the fact is Weaverville is growing. Weaverville is a great town, and many people, including members of this council, have chosen to move to this area to enjoy the quality of life that's offered here. We can't prevent this occurrence of growth as much as we would like to, but we are charged with the challenge of supplying the most basic need of water. I don't want to rely on the city of Asheville for our water supply. I don't want to go back to the days of water restrictions, rationing, or risk contamination because this council fails to address the needs of expanding our water system, which has been recommended over the past 5 years. This need will not go away, but the urgency of meeting this need will only become more critical as our growth continues. The cost will also continue to increase, but currently there is grant funding available and money, including through the American Rescue Plan that's been alluded to by the mayor, to help offset some of the costs. But due to continued economic stress, some of these funds may not be available for long, so we must act now. We as a community and you as a council have a responsibility to meet the needs of the town and its people by supplying the current quality of water we have through the Ivy River. I advocate for all the points outlined by the mayor with his recommendations to expand the water system, and I urge you as a council representing the needs of the people to demand the recommendations that have been outlined to ensure that we maintain our current water quality. You can't bury your head in the sand and think this problem is going to go away. We need a proactive approach instead of a reactive response. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Ann Brownstein? Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the audience?
Hello, James. I'm on 120 Sam's Road. I am not a town resident. I am a Logan County resident. I do not rely on the water treatment facility for my water. A couple of things. One, noting what you currently use and the plant's requirement to have their basins treated, it seems like there's options right now where you get source water if you do your water cellar connect. To essentially shut down the plant for 4 weeks, you could get water from other sources that you currently have and be able to do that maintenance. Obviously not ideal because some of the water may be a question. The second thing, the biggest thing that I did, when I did this, you guys know I didn't come into this knowing what I was doing. I wanted to prove myself wrong, and I wanted to find that this wasn't going to happen. This water didn't matter. That's what I wanted to find. I didn't want to spend a couple $100 looking into this and seeing that there is actually an impact. When people that grew up here talk about shortages and that these happen, guess what? The Ivy River had less water in it on several occasions in the last 20 years than you're talking about creating your capacity. That means you're going to have shortages if you only have a sole source. If you're not diversified, you're not going to be able to pull 3 million gallons out of the river on multiple occasions in the last 20 years. So, you know, this is my last shot. I don't really know how to explain it any differently or approach it any differently. But I believe the expansion is a negligent decision. And a lot of property owners along the Ivy River. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Michael Matthews. I live at 32 Mills Place. I do not live in Weaverville. However, I do own the Ivy River hydroelectric plant downstream from the water intake. I've spoken to several of you privately. I have sent all of you an email trying to outline some of my points succinctly with enough detail that you may be able to understand these impacts. First and foremost, let me apologize for one being also my casual attire. I'm summed up with one word: kids. So here we are. Also, shooting from the hip tonight, I usually try to prepare statements, but one of the overarching themes tonight has been, is there enough water in the river? And the short answer is DEQ said that there was. Does anyone on the council know when that decision was made? When did DEQ tell us that the river would support this withdrawal?
Some time ago.
Some time ago, yes, indeed. Lots of things change with river flows and the world, as we all know, in some time. We have the permit, you have the permits in place to do this. That's not in question. What is in question is just because you can, doesn't necessarily mean you should. Maybe you should. That's what we're here to decide. When some of the audience were asking questions, there was some pause from you when asked, will the river support it? There is a definite lack of assuredness from you that the river will support it. If the river won't support the proposed withdrawals, then why is the conversation continuing in the direction that we're going? Will the river support the withdrawals you proposed most of the time? Yes, it will. Will it support the withdrawals you want all of the time? No, it will not. That is in the data. Anyone here can go to USGS, they can look up the historical flows, and they will see that the historical flows miles downriver are questionable to be able to support what you're trying further upstream. What if, instead of deploying resources to develop, redevelop, maintain, and expand a resource that is marginal, why aren't those resources deployed for a sure thing? I'm not advocating for Asheville water. I don't know all the nuances and details, but let's use that as an example. Asheville has a very robust supply. You are already interconnected with the town. There are some very minute $50,000 battles, for example. Expanding a pipe, millions. Expanding the Ivy River plant, 17 million. Probably going to continue to increase, and it's a marginal solution. If you were to instead deploy that capital to a robust Asheville interconnect, and for some reason that didn't work out, you will always have the DEQ, Ivy River permits in your back pocket, and you can develop a resource later. You go to the sure thing, you develop something that's not a sure thing later with a buffer of extra funds. I have another question, and this is something that I've had a hard time wrapping my head around. I understand some of the reasons why, but the growth is going to happen. We've all come to that conclusion. Why can't we say, get your water elsewhere? The answer that I had got is that they're gonna get their water elsewhere, so we might as well be involved. We can influence developments. That is a huge thing. You can get what you like, you can influence these developments and hold water hostage, if you will. But one thing that I haven't really been able to ascertain is why there is such an onus or feeling that the town must supply this water. There was a member of the audience who stated that there was a time where there was rationing. There was rationing because the town had overrun its means.
No, it's not.
No.
Please, that's why we're here having this conversation. Can you tell me why this rationing occurred?
There were wells that were contaminated, so we had to stop using them. There was water in Eller Cove that we had used all the was.
But that, the Eller Cove, is
That was
for
the
reliable wells or
Trent
something.
says that was the very beginning of our water.
Right.
I mean, I wasn't alive then.
The Eller Cove supply going dry is essentially what I'm getting at, that the town exceeded its supply. The wells are a wild card. The same thing could happen to the watershed, which is another point that I was gonna make further down here, if you allotted me the time, was that have there been any studies done to the quality of the watershed? When this whole project was first done, the watershed had to have a lot of work done to it. The same thing that's happening in Asheville with the chromium and the other contaminants that happen in the Weaverville watershed. Just because it's contaminating and find another source doesn't mean that you're contaminating.
Yes, you move your phone from the podium on the blue, that might be causing problems.
Yes, so I apologize for that. The watershed, is not a sure thing either. Those things change, pollution change. Development is here to come, it's gonna happen in the north side, it's gonna happen in the watershed. I, like so many other people, applaud the regional approach. It is the only way that this town, Marshall, is gonna have water in the future, just that. But it doesn't need to be Weaverville supplying Marshall and Marshall. It needs to be everyone has their sources where they can share when they need to. The only reason that I can see, besides some philanthropic altruistic thing from Weaverville, is money. Marshall can build your plant, and Weaverville can charge for it. It's a source of revenue. And is that the purpose of government that we want? Someone brought up the fact that you took your rates and set your rate structure by your actual costs. That would make sense as a government satisfying the needs of the public. Again, shooting from the hip here. Sorry if I'm stepping on any toes, but one final point, and I wish I had statistics to back this up. I also run a water filtration company, so I know a thing or two about what's going on, and I see a lot of people's water usage. And I can say that rates and cost is a very motivating factor for people to use less water. People that can afford to use as much water as they want will continue to do so. People that have other priorities and would rather either gather elsewhere besides water, or unfortunately feel the impact of their water bills, will use less. It's just a fact. I wish I had statistics, but all of this is anecdotal. Again, sorry for being less prepared than I am. I wish that and I hope that we can have some additional conversations again. I have a lot to talk about the technical side of things, but this trend, I would particularly enjoy talking with you at some point from an operational side of things. Just how, regardless of how things go, how your operations and my operations can be the least impacted. I look forward to talking to Dale. Hopefully he has a moment or two to do that. And if anyone on the council has any questions at all, I want what's best for the town. And I want what's best for the river. And the last thing I want to see is for you guys to deploy a whole bunch of capital into something that is not going to be there when you need it.
Thank you very much. So as you all can see, this is a complicated issue. It involves a lot of people, a lot of players, a lot of money. But this is the important issue that this town council has to wrestle with. So we will be having this item on our agenda for our next regular meeting, which is the 27th of this month. Coming back for some more. Yes.
Would you like to offer for any of we've got a handful of Zoom attendees?
Oh, since it's you Zoom attendees, you're not in front of us, I didn't say yes, if you have a question or a comment, raise your hand on Zoom and I'll depend on our Zoom monitors over there to let us know if there are any.
None, but at least we asked.
As you did, and thank you for reminding me of that. So, thank you for your participation, thank you for being concerned about Weaverville and all its infrastructure, and we appreciate it. And with that being said, we're adjourned.
Hard hold, everybody.